North Korea described the latest UN sanctions against it as an act of war on Sunday, saying it was tantamount to a complete economic blockade. In a statement, the country's foreign ministry threatened to punish those who supported the measure.
And over in the U.S., Defense Secretary James Mattis says the best way for America to avoid war is if its troops are, quote, ready to go. Speaking to soldiers on Friday, he said U.S. diplomats rely on the military's preparedness, which allows them to speak with authority in negotiations. Won Jung-han with the details.
Storm clouds are gathering over the Korean Peninsula, U.S. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis said on Friday. Mattis was speaking to soldiers and airmen at the 82nd Airborne Division's Hall of Heroes in North Carolina as part of his holiday tour of bases to greet troops. He didn't go so far as to predict armed conflict, but he said America will have the best chance of preventing one if its words are backed up by a strong military. A military that is ready to take action, he said, will give weight to the words of diplomats as they try to put an end to North Korea's nuclear and missile programs. Mattis's remarks came as the United Nations adopted tough new sanctions on North Korea, seeking to ban around 90% of the regime's imports of refined petroleum products. While the defense secretary has highlighted the importance of military preparedness, telling the troops to read the book, A Study in Unpreparedness, published in a decade after the Korean War ended in 1953, to get an idea of what went wrong the last time around. Reports have suggested recently that the U.S. was considering evacuating the families of military personnel in South Korea, but Mattis said it hasn't reached that point yet. Mattis' remarks came as South Korea prepares to host the Winter Olympics in February in Pyeongchang, just 80 kilometers from demilitarized zone. Although analysts have warned that North Korea could try to disrupt the games with provocations, Mattis said he thinks that's unlikely.
North Korea's response to the latest UN sanctions slapped on the regime following its missile test in late November. Pyongyang says the U.S. should wake up from its pipe dream of the regime ever giving up its nuclear programs. Lee Jung-yeon has more.
North Korea has denounced the latest UN sanctions, calling them an act of war and vowing to retaliate against the U.S. sympathizers who approved it. According to the North Korean Central News Agency, the regime's foreign ministry called on the U.S. to abandon what it called its hostile policy toward North Korea and learn to coexist. The North also claimed that its weapons are solely for self-defense and that the U.S. should wake up from its pipe dream of it ever giving them up. The latest sanctions were passed unanimously on Friday. They slashed North Korea's imports of refined oil products like gasoline, require all North Koreans overseas to return home within 24 months, and they further restrict shipping. This comes about a month after the regime's latest ballistic missile launch that Kim Jong-un claims can target the entire United States, and a week after U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson called out Russia and China for supporting the regime. Meanwhile, North Korea held a gathering in Pyongyang this past week of lower-level officials in the ruling Workers' Party, the first such meeting in 5 years. The regime's state-run media has reported that leader Kim Jong-un gave a speech on Saturday saying everything the party has done so far is just the beginning. and that it will come up with more business ideas that will be carried out aggressively to build a stronger socialist state.
North Korea described the latest UN sanctions against it as an act of war on Sunday, saying it was tantamount to a complete economic blockade. In a statement, the country's foreign ministry threatened to punish those who supported the measure. The UN Security Council unanimously imposed new sanctions on Pyongyang on Friday, following its recent intercontinental ballistic missile test. The measures seek to limit the country's access to refined petroleum products and crude oil, with a near 90% ban. The UN also wants to curb earnings from abroad, with a demand for the repatriation of North Korean workers within 24 months. The US drafted resolution, supported by longtime Pyongyang allies Russia and China, commits the Security Council to further sanctions if there's another nuclear test or ballistic missile launch. In November, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un declared the nuclear force complete after the test of the isolated nation's largest ever missile, which it said puts all of the United States within range. It denies its nuclear program is in contradiction of international law, but rather a self-defensive deterrence. The latest statement described Washington as getting, quote, more and more frenzied in moves to impose the harshest ever sanctions and pressure on the country.
South Korea's foreign ministry told Reuters it is aware of the North Korean statement on the new sanctions, again highlighting its position that they are a grave warning by the international community that the region has no option but to immediately cease reckless provocations, and take the path of dialogue for denuclearization and peace. The North Korean Foreign Ministry said its nuclear weapons were a self-defensive deterrence not in contradiction of international law. We will further consolidate our self-defensive nuclear deterrence aimed at fundamentally eradicating the US nuclear threats, blackmail and hostile moves by establishing the practical balance of force with the US, it said. North Korea said those who voted for the sanctions would face its wrath. Those countries that raised their hands in favor of this sanctions resolution shall be held completely responsible for all the consequences to be caused by the resolution, and we will make sure forever and ever that they pay heavy price for what they have done. The North's old allies China and Russia both supported the latest UN sanctions. Tension has been rising over North Korea's nuclear and missile programs, which it pursues in defiance of years of UN Security Council resolutions, with bellicose rhetoric coming from both Pyongyang and the White House. Kim told a meeting of members of the ruling Workers' Party on Friday that the country successfully realized the historic cause of completing the state nuclear force despite short supply in everything and manifold difficulties and ordeals owing to the despicable anti-DPRK moves of the enemies. North Korea's official name is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK. China, with which North Korea does some 90% of its trade, has repeatedly called for calm and restraint from all sides. China said on Saturday the new resolution also reiterated the need for a peaceful resolution via talks and that all sides needed to take steps to reduce tensions. Chinese state-run tabloid The Global Times said on Saturday the tougher resolution was aimed at preventing war. It suggested the United States had wanted an even harsher resolution, and noted there was no indication in the resolution that the United Nations could grant the United States permission for military action. The difference between the new resolution and the original US proposal reflects the will of China and Russia to prevent war and chaos on the Korean Peninsula. If the US proposals were accepted, only war is foreseeable, it said in an editorial.